it like it is, bringing the community together and working for justice. Attorney Travis McConnell talks politics, trending news, and how you can make a difference. You're listening to We Trust Travis. Hi everyone. I'm Serena Fazana, journalist, host, and producer. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of We Trust Travis. Travis McConnell is a personal injury attorney with a huge passion for the community, and he has a lot of insight to share, so let's get right to it. Travis McConnell is actually joining us now from Indiana, and in the studio is criminal trial expert Paul Cisco. Paul, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Travis, let's start with you, though. So you are in Indiana. You are an attorney that practices both in Florida and Indiana. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, we've got an office in St. Petersburg, Florida, that has people there at all times. And then we also have an office in Warsaw, Indiana. And I'm licensed in both and kind of go back and forth when I need to. Since COVID times, a lot of it's been via Zoom and haven't had to go back and forth as much because we just do things via Zoom nowadays. Very few things are actually happening in person. But it's always fun to come to Florida and see everybody. So I live up here in Indiana most of the time and come down to Florida to visit and take care of business.
Well, it's great to see you. And Paul, you're in the studio here in St. Petersburg, Florida. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
I've been practicing criminal defense in the Tampa Bay area, Serena, for 29 or 30 years now. My family's been here for over 50 years. And, I've had the opportunity to meet Travis from another state, one of our lawyers we've met nationally now at this point. And I always enjoy talking to you about these type of issues. Well,
we really appreciate having you both here. And you've been on both sides of the law, Paul, former prosecutor as well, right. Now a criminal defense attorney. And the topic matter what we're going to discuss today, and Travis wants to talk about it. Let's talk about it. COVID in the courtroom and how it's affected the courtroom and how it's affected trials. Travis, why did you think this was an important topic for your show?
I mean, something that everybody's talking about anyway is just COVID, right? And how it's impacted us. And there's a lot of people that are on one side or the other, maybe. And it seems like camps have formed. It's been a little political. But it's had a certain impact on our courts. And just like to try and keep it to the facts as opposed to a lot of opinions. But just kind of update people how things are going. There's been a lot of advances forward. And there's been some that have caused some friction, as it were. And maybe not so much forward, but backwards, some might say. But yeah, just kind of give people an update about what the courts are looking like in all of this.
And how are the courts doing? The courts are reopened in the state of Florida and Indiana, correct?
They are, but it's ever changing. It takes every once in a while, if there's a report on the variant having an uptick, there is a political component to it. There's the administrators in both our counties here, Hillsborough and Pinellas, are very good at monitoring and kind of keeping an eye on the statistics. But as Travis knows from Indiana also, there is a little bit of a political component in terms of how it's sort of changed courthouse culture also. Some things that COVID brought on, like Zoom hearings, have their advantages. We've discovered that. We probably never would have discovered that. It's convenient. But as a practitioner like me and an old guy, I like being there. I think that two dimensions, although we love television and Zoom, I don't love Zoom, I love television, takes away a good percentage of your ability to communicate. People relate to people in personal and interpersonal communications, and I just feel like we're losing a little bit of that. I don't want to use COVID as an excuse to curtail a fulsome hearing.
Absolutely. How has it been there, Travis, with the courtrooms there?
Yeah, it's been pretty similar here where it closed down for a while and reopened. I practice in a lot more rural areas here in Indiana, and so they've kind of opened up and been more open quicker due to numbers being lower. It's not as densely populated, so there's not as much concentration, things like that. We got the second wave of it where it came back, but with the politics of it, our courts here have been more reluctant to shut down and things like that. But there has been an increase in usage of Zoom and things like that. And the big issue has been due to the backlog that happened from the shutdown is trying to clear out old cases that didn't get cleared out before and continue with the other cases that are still being filed in the meantime.
And on our previous show, we talked about the Sixth Amendment. We talked about quite a few of the amendments, but the right to a speedy trial. Has COVID in the courtroom affected that? And on both sides, right, the criminal and the civil side.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a civil trial that we were set to go to trial in March of 2020. Well, there was shutdown. So we got shut down and moved because of the shutdown. And that was on a civil case that we'd been waiting years to get a trial anyway. It was actually our second trial setting. We got bumped on the first one. Bumped meaning that we got moved over. The way that trials work in Florida is they have what's called a docket for civil trials, where they'll set 10 cases all in the same 2-week trial period or 3-week trial period. And you could be number 1 through 10 on the list, and you have to be ready to go, because if you're number 6, 1 through 5 might settle and back down, and then 6 becomes number 1. And so, but if you're number 6 and number 1 and 2 go and take up all the time, then you get bumped to the next time because there's not enough time. So we got bumped once and then set during the COVID shutdown. And so that got us moved again till October. And then in October, things reopened, but criminal trials took precedence because of the speedy trial right. And the in-custody criminal things have to be taken care of before civil things. And we got moved again on our trial, and it's now set out in 2022 that we've been waiting for.
Paul, let's have you weigh on that. So the criminal trials take precedent. So all of these clients now have to wait even longer.
Yeah, you kind of look at the motivations of every party. If you're a judge, even in normal times when COVID doesn't exist, you just have this feeling that they keep coming over the hill, right? Here come the criminal client or criminal defendants, especially. Here come my civil cases, and I always, perceive that judges thinking, oh, we've got to make sure we're handling these folks coming over the mountain at us. During COVID, that's been exponentially multiplied. I mean, there's tens of thousands of cases now coming over the mountain at us, and it clogs up the system. And frankly, as a criminal defense lawyer, in large part, it's to my advantage, right? Because there's a limited number of resources. This is always the math. There's a limited number of resources. How many and how much of those resources are they going to devote to the punishment for my client and the resource prosecution intellect going into prosecuting them? And so it works to my advantage in many ways, but the reality is it's generally just slowed things down quite a bit. Crime doesn't stop. In fact, it increases probably during COVID. There's a lot of arrests made. Prosecutors have to make decisions maybe to get rid of a case or resolve it in a manner that they wouldn't ordinarily be inclined to do during normal times. So it has certain defense advantages to it, but generally I'm looking forward to it returning to normal and back to where we were at some point.
Absolutely, because an advantage for you is a huge disadvantage, right, Travis, for your clients who really might be also financially suffering and they need some type of resolution.
Right. Well, you end up on the opposite side of things in my case. But I agree with Paul. Like, again, typically delay benefits the defense, but I'm not the defense when I'm on my personal injury cases. I'm the plaintiff. We're the ones there trying to get justice. And the defense is the insurance company defending their insured, or whoever it is, the corporate defendant, which is typically insurance involved. But it's benefiting them and to continue to delay. And I mean, sometimes you even start to wonder if there's intentional delay on some of the insurance companies. They know you can't take them to trial. You don't have that hammer hanging over their head. Every day that they, drag something out, they get more interest on their money sitting in bank accounts that they make. A lot of their revenue comes from interest returns and investments. So they have a financial incentive to delay.
Travis, you don't have to wonder about that. It's a fact. They do not. They want to hang on to that money as long as they can. I mean, in the mechanism and the anvil that's held over litigants' head and what moves the wheels of justice, as slow as they turn, what keeps them moving is trial dates, right? You better have a trial date set in a criminal case, and you better have one set in a civil case, or nobody's going to resolve it, because there's always a party that has an interest in slowing that down. Time is where the real equity is in a courtroom, and that's sort of a component I think the general public might not understand. That judge is thinking to himself or herself, what holds this person's feet to the fire? What makes them get the work done they need to get done for this? Because once you bring it to, hey, on Monday we're picking a jury, somebody's either going to pay some money in the civil context, or they're going to say, no, we're going to trial. And in the criminal side, somebody's going to say, am I going to take this deal, or am I going to trial? And if you don't have that anvil over their head, hey, we're just here, we need another date, Your Honor, that's going to happen forever.
Okay, so Paul went on the record on the last show and said that you don't have a lot of confidence in government. So, Travis, do you think, though, at this point, though, that the government needs to step in or something needs to happen, especially with the civil cases?
I think they're working on it a little bit. The judges are doing pretty good at bringing in and reassigning cases and trying to move things along. The problem is, like with the Delta variant, things have changed since the last time we've talked on some of our other shows. Things were still moving along as normal last time we had one of these shows. Since then, the Supreme Court has actually issued a new order, re-allowing anyone who wants to appear via Zoom to appear via Zoom in light of the increases in numbers from the Delta variant. So it's still a moving target as this all continues to develop.
Your thoughts, Paul?
It's a little different in the criminal side of things because, you have constitutional rights to be in a courtroom with the witnesses against you in a criminal case, where there's a little more leniency on the civil side. Liberty interests are placed higher than financial interests, which is why they exist criminally. There's a lot of talk about, hey, we're never going to return to normal and this kind of thing. And the reality is that we're going to have to figure out how we're going to have a fair criminal trial, because my client wants to be in the courtroom without a bunch of people wearing masks, and you're going to need to put your witnesses on and convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. I have a constitutional right with my client to do that. It's becoming a real problem on the criminal side.
Well, you bring up so many great points, because the masks I want to talk about, because reading the expression, and also finding a jury. So you want to talk about the masks first, because, when you wear a mask, of course, people are saying you can read your eyes a little bit better now, but you're hiding your facial expressions behind your mask.
It's absurd.
Yeah, I mean, they say what, like 90% of language is nonverbal, or something like that, 80-90%. And so, yeah, you're obscuring whatever percent of that percentage to where you're not able to read that nonverbal language.
Listen, I feel ineffective with that thing on, okay? David Letterman, to age myself, when I'm watching him in college, used to say, nobody looks cool in the back of a pickup truck when you're driving down the road. Nobody looks cool in a mask, okay? And it's not a matter of looking cool, but it's a matter of communicating. And, the whole time you're talking behind one of those things, which is foreign to you as a communicator, is, can they hear me? I'm having trouble breathing. You're thinking about everything except what you should be, which is convincing that person you're talking to of what the truth is. And we have no idea the level of communication that takes place from the lower part of a person's face. I mean, I think it's way underestimated. They know from control groups and so on that, and they use toddlers as their control groups. A person who's looked at as more credible, they read their face, they're reading their expression, because jurors don't necessarily, at the end of the day, know whether or not a Medicare regulation was violated, but they know whether that witness thinks there was, and I don't want half of my evidence behind a wall of cloth. It's just a very ineffective way to present evidence.
And that's really what having the jury is for. The purpose of a jury is to weigh the witness's credibility and determine what the truth is. I mean, that's one of their principal functions. They're what's called the trier of fact. They decide which facts they believe as the true facts and which ones they don't.
But gentlemen, what a sensitive subject, right? Because we're also bringing in health. And, if people say, well, I'm so fearful, how do you get around that?
Well, if you've been in the Hillsborough courthouse, there's many of us that fear about 9 other diseases that you get before COVID. People look at it differently. We're all taking risks. We all crossed Dale Mabry on the way to the studio today. What are the odds of us getting hit? The fear becomes irrational at some point. At some point, you've got to get back to business. You have to find a way to deal with it other than constant fear. It's a built-in excuse, candidly, that happens where, a judge can't really say, if I was to say to a judge, look, my client has a fear about COVID, Aunt Gladys, she's 105 and she's in the house and they're not comfortable being here. It's pretty hard for a judge to say, no, we're going to trial Monday. So, is Delta telling you to wear that mask all the time because of COVID, or is it because it makes it harder for you to ask for a cocktail or the peanuts? It's becoming part of the fabric of a little bit of a cop-out here and there. Our people are doing the best in both counties to do this, but there comes a time where we have to get back in the courtroom, and they have a right to be there instead of on a Zoom hearing.
Travis, what are your thoughts?
I mean, there's a middle ground approach to try and still take precautions without having to go all the way up the mask. I mean, wear the mask when you're in the courtroom, but take it off when you're on the witness stand and you're more than 6 feet away from everybody. I mean, you can allow for social distancing, and it's like the restaurant rule, right? You have to wear it until you sit at your table. You sit at your table, you can take it off. There's imperfect solutions that still provide some level of safety. That again, like there's going to be a certain level of risk. We can't eliminate all of it, and it's going to be slightly more risky than if you just left it on the whole time. But there are other precautions that we can still do to try and take the health into consideration, that make people feel as safe as possible, while still striking a balance. Because again, like, yes, you have a right to safety in your health, but our clients also have the right to confront their witnesses.
Yeah. Additionally, as lawyers, you're constantly thinking, frankly, during this COVID, well, this person has proclaimed a ruling. What authority do they have to do that? You start becoming constitutional lawyers in your head. There's a whole series of politicians that have said whether I have to wear a mask or not, which, they can't enforce, and I have no intention of following in many instances. The level of compliance when law wasn't directing in certain instances has been fairly shocking to me. But there are forums like the courthouse and so on where the chief judge and other people do have the authority to impose rules. Private business owners do also, and you have to abide by them. But I do like the fact that a lot of people have said to themselves, are questioning, where does this legal authority come from? There's a certain power which I find fascinating that has come to certain people just simply telling me whether or not I need to wear a mask or not. That's not justified legally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I mean, we talked about the speedy trial impact too. I don't know. I'm trying to remember exactly what you had asked about the masks and one other thing. Do you remember?
Yeah, about also picking a jury, because it's always difficult picking a jury in general. I know we are supposed to answer that call to be a juror, but it's always been difficult. What is it like now?
The courts are having to send out more subpoenas and more summons to appear because people aren't showing up. And they always had to send extras because people don't show up for jury duty in the first place. You send out 100 summons for jury duty, and 70 people would show up maybe in regular times. Nowadays, you send out 100 and maybe 30 or less might show up because they're afraid to come to the courthouse and concerned to come to the courthouse.
Well, and it's an interesting thing, too, from a litigant standpoint. So say I'm defending a case, and I think to myself, okay, they're going to bring over 100 jurors, and they're going to be ordered to be in masks, and maybe there's a genuine fear of COVID going on among them. Well, the folks, generally, I have to think to myself, well, do I want the demographics and the particular juror I'm looking for my case to be somebody who's saying, screw the government, I'm going to do what I want and come in here, because it might be the very people that are going to convict your client most of the time. So you're getting a different universe to draw jurors from. These aren't just 120 random folks that would otherwise be there. These are people that are there with a purpose and saying, yeah, I'm not staying home because of COVID. And what kind of person is that? Is that the person more likely to convict, or is that the person more likely to acquit? It plays into my math. I know that.
Excellent point.
Yeah, no, it does on our math too. On the civil cases, is again, especially since it's so political, you're getting one maybe particular political persuasion that's showing up versus the ones that aren't showing up, or of the other political persuasion more often than not, as a general rule. It's not everybody. There's always exceptions. But yeah, instead of just getting 12 people that have driver's licenses, because that's usually what they pull it from. Bad news if you got a license. Sorry, that's how you get stuck with jury duty. But if you don't want to be on a jury, then don't have a license. Yeah, instead of that, you get that, but the people that show up are of a particular persuasion that are going to show up, and those that don't are of a particular persuasion that are staying home. So it's a smaller cross section.
Well, to Travis's point, this happened a few years ago, not with COVID, but, they went in Florida from the jury panels used to be pulled from the voter records, okay? And now they're pulled from the driver's license records, as Travis says. Well, those are two different groups, One is a group of people that like to vote in Florida, and one's a group of people that like to drive in Florida,
Right.
okay? As a defense lawyer, give me the ones that like to drive, because as you know from the roads in this county and others, there's a lot of crazy folks out there, and generally on the defense side, you want people that are a little crazier. The ones that are voting oftentimes are going to be more interested in civic events. They're many times going to consider themselves more educated, whether they are or not. They participate in institutional activities. The voter records used to be folks, as a prosecutor, used to convict more than the people that like to drive. And COVID has done that on a different scale. Now we're seeing a different, subgroups that come in where you have folks that maybe hold, as they're entitled to, personal health above their duty to serve as jurors. And who's the group you're getting otherwise? And I don't care what any lawyer says. I'm not particularly interested in justice. I'm concerned with justice for my client. Okay, the government can get its justice later. I want justice for my client, and who's the better jury for it, COVID or pre-COVID?
Yeah, I mean the whole goal with jury selection is you want as broad of a cross section as possible. That's why they switched to driver's licenses, and you want to be able to choose from that. And we're getting less people because people aren't showing up.
So, gentlemen, if I heard correctly, are you both also saying that already the political persuasion that someone might have is affecting the jury pool that's coming into courtrooms right now?
Well, so I don't believe there's ever a way you can say I'm going to get 12 peers of my client that are going to be fully impartial. No one's impartial. We all come with our biases or life experiences that have changed how we perceive things. But when you start eliminating certain criteria where you can eliminate an entire group of people who say, I don't want to show up for jury duty for health concerns, you are changing that demographic from which you're picking. And you better be aware of it. And to think otherwise or to say otherwise is to be doing your client a disservice.
But are you seeing it?
Oh, yeah.
You're actually seeing it?
Well, jury trials aren't happening, okay? I mean, it's been brought down to a trickle from where it would be during normal times. I mean, yes, they are happening here and there, and the counties are back having them, but they're happening in a very small percentage of the times. And frankly, both on the civil and criminal side, judges are really looking at you closely to say, is this one that really needs to go to trial then because I've got limited resources? Or is this one that can wait a while, or are you guys actually going to resolve this? And so there isn't a huge control group to draw from during COVID to say, how is this jury different? But I will tell you, it's impacting trials. We saw a very high profile one in Hillsborough recently, in which, and Travis alluded to it, where the child witness testified against the father who was on trial for a homicide from a video camera. And that was partly because of privacy concerns and the age of the child and such, but it was also because of COVID concerns. And, frankly, if I was a criminal defendant and I was on trial for my life and I was looking up at a panel that had masks on and I wasn't really looking at those faces, I'm thinking to myself, there's a little bit of concealment that goes on. Like, if I'm going to put a man to death, I'm going to look him in the face, and I'm entitled to look at them in the face. And, we're kind of perverting that element, when we're requiring these masks in certain events. So we either don't have them at all, but this process of doing them with masks on or having jurors sit 6 feet apart, we're introducing a whole sort of star chamber level to this, which is unnecessary.
Well,
Travis,
I've
your
even heard
thoughts?
of, yeah, I mean, I've even heard of some juries. I haven't had one because, again, like it's down to a trickle. I have some that have been set that we're waiting for. But I've heard of some judges even doing, like, the jury is via Zoom. They're not even in the courtroom. Like, everyone, it's all via Zoom. And it's like the Brady Bunch or something. Everybody's in squares. I couldn't even imagine trying to do something like that.
Right. And so, do you know, is juror number 7 really watching my evidence, or are they watching Pat Sajak on Wheel of Fortune out of the other?
Right.
And maybe I want them to be watching Wheel of Fortune halfway and not fully watching. So, the dynamic changes. We don't know what's going on in Zoom. I mean, I had a judge tell me the other day that a defendant appeared from his bed on his pillow like this, and just said, we got to get him back, we got to get him back in the courtroom, because you lose a little bit of the institutional authority and people saying, hey, look at this rich mahogany furniture here, and the judge is sitting up on that podium in the black robe. You put everybody on TV and we're like another TikTok video.
Absolutely. And I know, Travis, you had talked about Zoom can sometimes have advantages if it's, something quick.
Yeah.
But for the most part, do you feel too that it just has to be back in person?
I think trials and things like evidentiary in nature, where you're going to make a determination about credibility and evidence, need to be in person. Other than that, Zoom allows a lot more flexibility, especially for things that could have been done via phone even, but they didn't feel comfortable doing them via phone, like a scheduling conference where you're just going to schedule something. Do we really have to come into the courthouse for that and spend an hour in traffic and then another hour in traffic on the way back? Or now we can just do it via Zoom, and it's great.
I agree with Travis on that. I agree, Travis. There's clerical small scheduling hearings and so on. Zoom's been fantastic for that. You throw a tie on and you sit there, and it's like the Brady Bunch, and you say, Judge, I need this date. It's fantastic for that. As Travis says, for those evidentiary matters, though, I sure want that witness there, because I'm going to read them differently than I am when they're on the tube.
Right. Yep. And even like depositions, where I'm taking depositions to gather evidence, I don't mind those via Zoom, depending on what it is. Just to find out what the person's going to say, because you're not reading them as much. It's more talking to them to find out what they're going to say and things like that, and getting those questions in. But I don't know how you feel about that, Paul, if you prefer your depositions live. I know some people are kind of insisting, no, I want them live versus I want them via Zoom. But
Well, I like, what I don't like is putting me in a position where technology is now more important than sort of, my experience. That happens with exhibits. I have 5 or 6 exhibits that are usually documents that I want to show a witness. And, I can go, okay, wait a minute, are you guys seeing this? And put it up on the screen, and, you're losing all your spontaneity. And then the witness has a chance, if they're hostile with you, to kind of, through that delay, kind of figure out where's Cisco going with this. It's awkward. And it doesn't have the same impact, and it's certainly a different animal than we're used to dealing with in terms of evidentiary hearings. It's certainly, it's proven it's got its place in many areas for clerical situations, and it does save time. I'm an old guy that likes to walk to the courthouse every once in a while,
Yeah.
and I like seeing my folks, seeing my colleagues and the judges and prosecutors, the coffee stand folks. I miss all that, like everybody misses their people. But Travis is right. It has its place. It's just not in a trial, and it's not in an evidentiary hearing.
And what about the professionalism and the wardrobe? I mean, like you told me, you just talked about the guy that was sleeping in his bed. I mean, I heard so many stories of the way people dress or where they're coming to you from. I mean, does something need to change on that as well?
I think it is changing. Even some of the lawyers have gotten a little lax with how they appear. I've seen it in judges' procedures. Each judge usually has their own preferences and procedures on their webpage. And if you go look at them, you'll probably in Hillsborough find at least 1 or 2. I'm not thinking of one right now that I've seen in Hillsborough, but one in Sarasota County, I know that I've had a case where it's been written into the judge's new preferences, we will be enforcing proper courtroom attire via Zoom. If you don't have it on, the judge will bring it to your attention. So it's in the preferences of the lawyers are reading, because lawyers got lackadaisical with it.
Yeah, and I'm learning things I don't need to know, right? Like I know a lot about the interior of people's dens now. I know a lot about what they read, because the whole time I'm supposed to be concentrating on what they're saying. I'm like, why does he have that Karl Marx book there in the background? Or, wait, Cooking with Tessa, which volume is that? There's a lot of
distractions.
There's a lot of distractions, and it's an environment we're not used to, and it's taking away from what we're really there for. That's what bothers me.
Well, and again, like what Paul mentioned earlier, as far as courtrooms are designed to impress or maybe even intimidate people a little bit, like the big tall ceilings, the mahogany, all that sort of stuff that Paul was talking about. It's to get people to understand that this is serious, and you don't have that with this sort of a dialogue and via Zoom.
That was well put. I think it's diminished the seriousness of the event or the solemnity. Sort of what it's. It's something that we believe in firmly, and it's supposed to be in some of our more impressive architecture buildings, and we're going to do it now where, defendant Livingston can be on his bed, on his pillow, and now we're all a little less for that.
Absolutely. I will say, don't you think we all can agree that more people than not, of course, are hoping that things will get back to normal in every area of life?
Well, I certainly am. I also, I'm of the generation, I don't trust the government, okay? And I don't even care what party anyone belongs to. I'm independent. But I'm not one that says, oh, the government will fix this. And we're sort of in a rut there. And there's a lot of folks that think the government's there to fix things like this. And it's people that are going to say, no, we're getting back to normal, and here's how it's going to happen. And no, I'm not going to give in to that. Sometimes it takes a little more willpower than it does a vaccine.
Like boots on the ground mentality. Really, it's up to us to make the change.
Correct.
Yeah, I think we all want things to get back to normal for the most part, but I think people more and more are realizing it's going to be a new normal. Like COVID's a thing. There's lots of people that have been, I think everyone knows somebody who's been impacted by it for the most part. There's still a few people that maybe don't. It's here. It's been politicized and blown out of proportion and used, just like a lot of things in our current culture and how things have gone so tribal. But it's part of life. And at some point, we're going to have to decide that we're going to have to learn how to live with it. And unfortunately, that might mean that there's a slightly increased or decreased life expectancy because it does impact people's health. But it's something that's here and it's not going away. And we need to, still live our lives.
There is always this element that history doesn't repeat itself. It rhymes to some extent. In Hillsborough County, about 25 years ago, an old, very beloved judge contracted TB. like Elmer Fudd here. And when they did that, we all had to get TB shots. The judge is like, hey, down by the hot dog stand, this is like 1998. Everybody stand in line and you're going to have to get a TB shot. Well, and guess what? We were back to work that afternoon. Now, I'm not saying medicine hasn't advanced and so on, but sometimes it's all on how it's handled also. And social media kind of has a way of magnifying the anecdotal story. The anecdotal story sometimes now gets magnified to the bulk of what's happening, and sometimes it's a fundamental error in terms of stats, and we're confused and we're sort of jaded by those numbers when we shouldn't be.
Yeah, and the disinformation that gets spread as well. That's just
right.
The conspiracy theories and all of it. So.
Absolutely, we're being inundated with information everywhere. Well, gentlemen, such a fascinating conversation. Paul Cisco, always wonderful to have you on the show. We trust Travis. Travis, any final words before we close out?
No, I think we're just all looking forward to getting back into court. And thanks, Paul, for joining, and Serena again for hosting.
Thanks, Travis. Good to see you.
Absolutely. And thank you, everyone, so much. We really appreciate it. Have a great day. To learn more about Travis McConnell, head to travismclaw.com. Thank you for listening to We Trust Travis.